just too intense and couldn't do it. So I had to leave. I wrote 9 of the first Endless Quests, and I've written in total 36 books. I've just gotten a new contract for 4 Endless Quest type books, and I'm talking to Penguin about possibly an adult Endless Quest. So life is pretty interesting. I live on the Oregon coast, and I really don't have much connection with anybody anymore. It's sort of sad. I don't really know how it happened. It just we all went in different directions.
Moved away and got married.
I did. I did, much to
No
my
time for us
surprise.
peasants.
I love it in Oregon. It's hard not to wake up every morning and look at the ocean and be unhappy. So.
Okay.
I'm Donovan Scherer. I run a bookstore called Studio Moonfall in Kenosha, and I've got a booth in the vendor hall. You can find some of Rose's books in my store, and I also write and illustrate upper elementary, middle school level fantasy books and horror, and I mostly do coloring books full of weird monsters and farting unicorns now.
I'm Ivy Rue. It's hard to follow these people, but I have 2 short stories published right now through different anthologies with Krishnitz and Red over here. And I also have a traditional contract for my first novel coming out end of next school year.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
You're in high school and you're going to get a novel out.
Yes, and would you?
Mine was at 30. Mumble. Hi, I'm Bill Fawcett, and I'm the opposite end of the spectrum from Ivy here. I was around before when they were mimeograph sheets. I wasn't playing in the original group. I was playing in a spin-off. One of the original group was running a guy named Bill Hoyer. He's no longer with us. I wrote what I call the centerfolds, or for most of the first 45 issues of The Dragon. Those were the game aids, the new characters. All that was my job, was to create something new for the game. First Chosen Path was in there. Elf Quest it was called. I didn't know Richard and Wendy that. I went on from there. After that, I had to leave because I founded Mayfair Games, ran the Roll Age line, designed most of their board games. I've also eventually left that. I was a book packager. I packaged I've worked with about 600 different writers on 400 to 500 books for major publishers, where I created a concept, edited it, worked with the writer, turned in a final manuscript to the publisher. I also write. I've got about a dozen nonfiction and a dozen plus fiction books out in my name and Lynn Fawcett and other pen names, so people aren't disappointed.
And Bill was responsible for getting me a 3-book contract with Bantam to write the young adult backup version to Cave of the Clan Bear, which unfortunately the final editor said, well, it's great, but there's not enough fantasy and there's no sex. And I said, it's supposed to be a young adult. She said, well, that's why the vocabulary is a little bit low. Just go back in there and up the vocabulary and put in some fantasy and sex. So it never found the market it was aimed for, but Bill was responsible for getting me there.
Yeah, I can't control a dumb editor. I've been one, but I can't control it. And other than that, I worked in a few other things, designed online RPGs, a few things like that aren't relevant.
Hi, I'm Jody Lyn Nye. I mostly write science fiction and fantasy, with a little bit of this and a little bit of that thrown in. But my first job in publishing when I was 19 years old was typing the Player's Manual DNG and Monster Manual for Gary Gygax from his notes, deciphering his handwriting and his extremely creative spelling and so on. But for a buck a page, that was my first job in publishing. I've gone on since then. I've wrote my first professional short story with Bill Fawcett and David Drake arguing over my head about the upcoming Fleet set of shared world anthologies.
Gary did a story in the first one of.
Yes, which Luke now has a copy of. This is a cool thing. Because I started out playing Dungeons and Dragons, I had a background in role-play game and how to follow a chosen path adventure, so I ended up writing those as my first professional book publications, which led to my first novel publications for Warner Books under Brian Thompson and for, I guess it was Bay Books.
You did some for Bain, you did
that's
some
right.
for Ace.
My first two books, one science fiction, one fantasy, came out within a month of each other. And that was daunting and fabulous and wonderful all at the same time. Put me on the New York Times bestseller list. And since then, I've published around 56 books and over 200 short stories. I teach the Writers' Workshop at DragonCon every year, 2 days worth of intense thinking and editing and giving them all sorts of background. And I am the coordinating judge for the Writers of the Future contest. So it's now in its 42nd year, and the anthologies that come out of it are huge and beautiful and full of wonderful stories. So
You can also admit.
I do knit,
Including
I do calligraphy,
So you
I
get
do
3
specialty baking, I do all sorts of crazy things on the side because you can't always be making words. Your brain needs time to rest. And of course, I am servant to cats.
What a humble room to be in. I'll tell you what, I gotta walk away. But honestly, this hour is for y'all. A little less than an hour. We will be wrapping up at about 10. So really, the floor is yours. So go ahead.
So I'm a grade 9 teacher, English, and do a lot of creative writing. And what would be something you would say to like a 14, 15-year-old writer who struggles a bit for ideas? Because I'm sure all of you have had that moment where you just can't get the idea out. What would you do to kind of kickstart?
One of the things that we do at the Writers of the Future Gala, which is coming up in 2.5 weeks, is they have to write a story in 24 hours, which I would not put your kids through. But one of the things that they have always done is hand them a prompt object. Tim Powers, who was my co-teacher, you probably know him from Drawing of the Dark or The Anubis Gates or many other books. Hand them an object and say, let this inspire you. You know, what is this from? What odd thing? I have a box of prompt objects that are not easily identified. So you have to figure out how they might work in your world. Give them something to start from.
One of the fun inspirations for people that age, I don't know if it's still out there, but its equivalent is National Enquirer. I had a 2-headed baby by an alien Elvis. Infinite numbers of science fiction stories in them.
Yeah.
Just because they're desperate to put something down every week. So I would say you don't have to do one of these, but here's some crazy ideas. If you want something to play with, do that one or pick one and do it.
I'm sure we can find even just the headlines online for that too. You know, you don't need the stories.
You know,
The
it's just the
SCP stuff is the modern equivalent.
Pardon me?
The SCP
Oh, yeah.
Foundation stuff, the kids are all familiar with those characters.
Oh, yeah.
So.
I actually do know what that is.
Write a story about Slender Man or something.
Yeah, Slender.
Or the Darwin Awards or the Journal of Irreproducible Results. These are all crazy ideas that might inspire them.
And remember, with what you're doing, trademark and copyright are relevant. They want to do Superman, they can do Superman.
Yeah.
Something that I really like to do when I run out of ideas is reimagine the ending or any part of a book or a movie I really like. So that's not as much of like the ideation part, but if I'm writing, I'm more likely to think about it. So just finding those things that it's really easy to, you don't really have to make up anything. It's already, the world is already there. You can just make something in it.
Another question?
We had
I had one. So Jody, I know you worked on the Crossroads Adventures. I know you have 2 from with Anne McCaffrey's books.
Yeah, 2 Anne McCaffrey, 2 Piers
And
Anthony.
2 Piers Anthony. Did you have to work with either of those 2 authors on those, or
I didn't.
did you interact with
I
them?
did interact, because I also did the Dragon Rider's Guide to Pern, the Dragon Lover's Guide to Pern, and the Visual Guide to Sand. So, spent several days, many days. We were at Anne's daughter's wedding. We frequently visited them because, for one thing,
Anne was a close friend of both of us.
Mayfair Games did the Dragon Rider's Pern board game as well. So we knew her many, many years.
She went on to write the Ship Who books now with Anne.
I wrote numerous books with Anne. With the Choose Your Own Adventures, I did not consult. I read everything that I could get my hands on by the 2 authors. And I'm a good mimic. So much so that when the first book came in and went to Tor Books into the hands of Beth Meacham, who was the editor at the time, she said, "Oh, it was so nice of Anne to rewrite the book so that it sounded like her." And I fumed about that.
It was a left-handed compliment.
Yeah, very much so.
Yes, and you get to know writers you work with and their worlds and their things. And I'll give you a little secret. Many of the characters in books are somebody. All of us Tuckerize matter. I just did a military SF and put Kevin Dockery, the guy who created Moral Project and writes all those SEALs books, in as a character in a Powered Armor thing. Jody's even in Xanth's book, because when we were down with Piers, she ran around in short shorts the whole time because it was 90 degrees. And in the next book, a character called the Leg Nymph appeared. Yeah, and it bore a striking resemblance to Jody, which she warned us about in advance.
I have a question for you, Rose. You were there at the beginning with TSR, and when I look at some of the stuff that you created since, your narrative voice is really beautiful. How did you, in the beginning, there was a lot of like rule and mechanic and technical kind of stuff in some of that early game. How did you weave in narrative and weave in story in a way that kind of made them flow together, both the game and the story parts of the worlds that were being created?
That's a really good question. I didn't know that I did. I've never played the game, which is sort of a ridiculous thing to say, but I was surrounded by it 24 hours a day. I lived in Hotel Claire with Brian Bloom and Tom Wam. So I was right there, cheek and jowl, all the time. The narrative is what I'm comfortable with.
Clearly, I mean, it's beautiful. That's why I was asking kind of like what your process was to bring that to it.
Her talent of writing good narrative with interesting characters to what she was listening to 26 hours a day, constantly, including from me and everyone else, because we were all writing that stuff.
Yeah.
And she was living with one of the game designers.
Of course. But I was just curious of what was striking to you, like where you found those elements of, like this is the narrative piece.
You probably know more about it than I do.
Oh.
I don't, there's not a whole lot of thought.
It's just what's natural to you, huh?
It's just, I just have to get myself in a place where there's no other input of anything and stop thinking
And it just
and
comes.
then just let it out, yeah.
Well, I'm glad you let it out. Another question?
Actually, I have just a follow-up comment and then for Bill. It's funny that you say that you didn't have that much knowledge on the game mechanics, because the first one, Dungeon of Dread, that's one of the ones, you and Larry Elmore basically got me into Dungeons and Dragons. my little brother and I got the Dungeon of Dread, and then I was at Kmart one time and I saw the red box set, and now I'm there. So thank you. But it's one of my first dungeons I ever made was actually adapted, and then it was stolen totally from Dungeon of Dread, and everything in it, because you have all the creatures in it. It's a very traditional dungeon kind of crawl with these two characters. So it's really interesting now that you tell me that. I didn't know much of the mechanics, because I was always curious about that part of it. And and there were some other really good writers in there, but I think your first 9 books really set the stage for the rest of the Endless Quest books.
I would agree.
Yeah, for it too. So I think it was great that you started it in that manner, because it could have ended up, if someone else had done it, it might have been really mechanical, maybe not as successful for it too. So yeah.
Well, what I didn't like about, I only read the one, Choose Your Own Adventure, but what I didn't like about it was there wasn't enough story. It was, it was stripped pretty bare of story. It was just a framework that held the questions or held the choices. And I'm more of a story person. So.
Yeah, because I was into the Choose Your Own Adventures at the time, and so was my little brother's like 5 years younger than me. So I was getting out of those, because they are really kind of kiddie-ish with a lot of them for the choices and such. And then we picked up Dungeon of Dread, and we never touched on their Choose Your Own Adventure again. We went right into all those because they were better. And it's right, because your stories were better, and we felt more like we were part of the characters in the story rather than we're just.
I still appreciate both for like what they are.
Yeah.
I mean, I definitely think they hold their own ground.
Yeah, as a teacher now, they're almost for different age sets. Like the Endless Quest books were perfect for my age group, because I'm coming out of that 10, 11, getting to 12, 13, 14, and it's a little bit more, there's death in it, and and things.
You
like
had
that.
a follow-up for Bill as well?
So Bill, you were working for Mayfair with the Rolaids line. I actually got picked up a copy a little while ago, Beastmaker Mountain, I've been looking for years.
I sort of know that.
Yeah. So how did you?
That was our first volume,
For me.
That was number 1.
Yeah. So I'm just curious about the whole Beastmaker Mountain. How did that come about, like for you? Because I know the relationship between Mayfair Games and TSR sometimes was like, it was a matter of like, okay, you can use our stuff, and after a while it's like, we're gonna.
They sued us.
Yes.
We won.
Yeah, we're gonna sue you. Stop using our stuff. You want to talk about that? Even just maybe the beginning parts and a little bit about that relationship a bit, or?
Okay, Beastmaker Mountain came about because we needed a module. I'd been writing them for TSR for 3 years at that point. It's basic, or Joe Orlowski, the assistant editor of Dragon Magazine, is Orla the Beastmaker. It looks like him, sounds like him, everything else. And it was inspired by Tagle Manor.
Okay.
To have things, there are rooms that there's just a sound in and things like that, which Tagle Manor is also known as.
Yeah.
And it was meant to tell a story instead of just walk you through encounters, because I always felt it needed more of that. And that was a theme we maintained, that our Rolaids told a story instead of just being a series of encounters or something like that. We wanted a little more depth. And it popped back, and TSR started doing more of it too, and then got better covers, and we had to go to color art. They didn't like us after we started doing Rolaids, which is about 1.5 years into the company. Before then, we'd done just board games, and it was a little antagonistic at one point, simply because we were the first company to actually do a big push on doing a professional quality Rolai. We're using Boris Viejo art, among other things, on our covers and stuff, which we got by agreeing to do a Boris Viejo art game, which sold 11 copies, but you let us use all exclusive on his art on the covers. It actually came to the point where they sued us, and they should have clobbered us. They should have.
Explain what the suit was about.
The suit was suitable for use with Dungeons and Dragons, and many companies are starting to do it, so they decided to make an example of us. The problem was my partner was a Kirkland and Ellis lawyer who had escaped. Major law firm. He'd been working at XM Valdez. His law school roommate was an IP specialist. And TSR just assumed everything would go fine and didn't pay a lot of attention and was terribly shocked when the judge went, "You haven't proved your case. They can do it." Which they shouldn't have done. They blew it. They blew it. It was embarrassing. We were all embarrassed. We were counting on the publicity from it and then we'd take it off the cover. Instead, we got to do suitable for use with but not approved for Dungeons and Dragons for the rest of the line. About 2 years later, the Blooms forced Gary out. And then they brought in Lorraine, who Gary brought in to force them out, and instead she forced everybody out and took over the company. You're talking about the corporate politics Rose is talking, and it could be pretty intense. I mean, every year and a half there was a Night of the Long Knives, a Bloody Friday, Black Thursday. They had names because they'd have 400 employees, and 3 hours later they had 300 employees.
If you look at the Empires of Imagination book, which is a really short listen if you want to do the audio version, it'll have a lot of that history, the build-up, and then the loss and
Several
some of
times
that.
with overconfident hiring and then reality setting in.
Mhm.
And Lorraine sued everybody. Lorraine tried to trademark Nazi and Dragon. And
Hobbit.
Hobbit. And the Tolkien estate had words with her, and that's why they became halflings. And eventually, she was not doing it terribly good. There were unenforceable things like that, and they were wasting. And she looked at it one day and went, "We just spent $2 million on attorneys and only got $200,000 back." And said, "Why are we doing this?" And what she created, by the way, was the Game Manufacturers Association, which is still around, was put together to protect us from TSR. And then Lorraine did a 180-degree turnaround, put the D20 out, and said, "We love you all. Here's things you can do. Here's things you can't, but do all the things you want, and we'll support you." And joined Game Manufacturers Association. There's been a close cooperation with all the game companies ever since. So it turned around when it turned out to just not be cost effective, basically.
So
That's the short version of the relationships.
When you talk about like some of the blocks that have been put up legally, I want to talk about that kind of transitions to a question I have. That's a different kind of block. And I'd love to start it out with Rose and Jody Lyn. I walked through doors today that you ladies knocked down. And then I want to finish it up with a follow-up to Ivy. And the industry has changed over its now 51 years in existence quite a bit. And I'm curious about some of the trailblazing that you guys, what's a moment of trailblazing that you're willing to share with us in knocking down some of those doors for women gamers and writers, for people in less included communities, because for a long time gaming and gaming writing in particular was very exclusionary. And so I'm kind of curious, you had to leave, with some politics, and you just pushed forward, and you're like, I'm one of the first. And so I'm kind of curious if you're each willing to maybe share, something that you had to overcome and how you overcame it. And then from Ivy, as a follow-up, I want to know what you're still maybe seeing as a block in front of you.
Well, shortly before I came to TSR, well, not so shortly, I was pregnant, and I realized I was pregnant, and my husband decided to leave, and I had 2 children under 5. So I was working for a newspaper in Janesville, Wisconsin, which was about 40 miles from Lake Geneva, and they were far right wing, and I didn't disclose the fact that I'd been ill and that I was in chemotherapy because I was coming up to my last session with that, and I didn't feel like sharing it. So I told my editor that I had a medical procedure I had to do, and I would be out for 2 days. And he and the senior partner decided that I was having an abortion, just out of the blue decided this, and fired me. And why didn't I know about suing people? So I was in fairly desperate straits, and I was either going to have to drive to Milwaukee or take the train to Chicago every day to find another paper to work for. I was seeing Tom Long, and he was roommates with Brian. And he said, "Hey, my girlfriend needs a job. Can we hire her?" Brian said, "Okay." And that was it. They didn't know anything about me. And I did a lot of dog's body jobs and learned along the way that as pleasant as they were definitely not feminists. And that Gary and not Brian, but Gary and a lot of other guys there were definitely in that mode. And I worked there for 4 years before Endless Quest came up. I found a copy of Choose Your Own Adventure, and my job, one of them, was trying to explain the game to ministers, teachers, parents who were convinced we were leading their kids into demon worship. And when I
Satanic
saw
panic.
that book, I knew that it was the best way to explain the game. So I took it to my boss, who said, "Okay, no." And I just kept at it because it really, really bothered me, their attitude and the fact that I knew I was right. And the more they wouldn't listen to me, the angrier I got. And I don't know where the courage came from. Maybe I just got fed up. But I just kept at it even when I was, told seriously to back off. And finally my boss said, "If you think this is such a hot idea, you go home and do it yourself." And so I did. And then it sat on his desk for 3 months and he never touched it. I'm not sure how it came to Random House's attention. I don't know. But they knew it was the right thing to do, and so they snapped it up and said, "Okay, but we have to have 4, we can't just have 1. So he came back on January 3rd and dropped it on my desk and said, "Write 3 more, I need them by April 1st. So that was it. I didn't know I was opening the door for anybody. I didn't know I was doing anything except maybe pushing back against an attitude that I dealt with for way too many years."
I'm literally crying over here. You did. You opened doors. Thank you.
Something on, he said to me once, I think it was Kim.
Pardon?
I think it was Kim who passed it on, because he's doing Gary's books for them too. Kim Mohan.
He did what?
Kim is the one who mentioned them to Random House.
Really?
Yeah, because he was doing Gary, just bringing the Gordon books to him at the same time.
Well,
Just doing the books with him.
Looks like you had an ally. And by the way, I just started crying over here. Yes, you did open doors. You did. Jody Lyn, I would love to hear your take on some of this.
My take always was, I have never met a man who deserved to make more for doing the same job as me just because he's a man. Yes, yes, darling. I know it comes as a great shock. Almost 38 years of marriage. But my parents always raised me to do whatever I felt that I wanted to do, as long as I was capable of doing it. So to have that kind of backing behind it, because my grandparents always said, "Yes, you can do this." My mom's dad was an artist and a printer and many other things, but he encouraged all of his children to go forward and try something new, including his eldest daughter, who decided that she was happy with being a stay-at-home mom. But my mother went to art school at the Art Institute of Chicago. So for her, that was eye-opening. And although at the time, it was not the easiest time to study because all these handsome, fit young men were coming back from World War II. She was a little distracted. But I was not the only one. I was not anywhere near the first of my kind when I came into science fiction. Now, when I came into the game industry, the dungeon that I played in already had 2 women in it. So I was not alone in gaming. A role-play game was a big, friendly, open, at least I saw it as a friendly, open exercise for us because, well, for one thing, there were not very many women there. So the guys were very happy to have us play. I think at first, a lot of them were surprised that we were actual contenders as players. And then they just got over it. But every generation of young men coming up say, girls, what are girls doing here? How dare girls be here? And my reply is, Sonny, I was playing with your grandparents, so shut up. When I started in science fiction, got to one of the first conventions that I ever attended as a professional. I was given a button which I still have that had 3 Greek characters on it. New sci-fi.
Ha, I love that.
They had gotten to the point where they were welcoming young woman writers in, Susan Schwartz, Esther Friesner. Gosh, I met so many people that day. You know, but it was a great party. It was a great moment, and I felt welcomed and supported. When I started working with Anne McCaffrey, I worked a little bit with Andre Norton, who had been incredibly important to me. Her book saved me for science fiction. When I was a very young teen, I said to one of my teachers, because I used to communicate with my teachers a lot more than my peers, what is this science fiction stuff? And one of the teachers, very nice man, but I think a little misguided and depressed. I think he was actually depressed. Handed me Vonnegut and Martian Chronicle Bradbury. Yeah, absolutely. So this was all the early 1950s stuff, which was end of the world kind of things. And the Martian Chronicles, which very much has a story that ends with the Earth turning into a cinder. Now I live here. I took offense to it. And it freaked me out. So I said, I will never read science fiction again. Wandering through the library at my high school, I came across a book called The Crystal Griffin by Andre Norton.
Hola.
Yeah, and very important because it's a very positive story. It's a love story, which at that age didn't really matter to me. But it was an adventure, and it seemed to be a fantasy. And then at the end, we find out that it is post-apocalyptic, but humanity has survived. And that's another reason that I love Star Trek. Is humans not only survive, but we thrive, and we go out into the stars, and we meet other creatures, and we do not kill them, and they do not kill us. Sometimes. Well, then, there's
Well, thank you
exceptions to
for
everything.
bringing your positive voice to all of this.
Yes. Well, I like a happy ending. What? Yes, my first Gen Con, which was 1977, I was one of 6 women there, and one of only 3 not named Gygax. So it was kind of a revelation, but again, I did not feel unwelcome. And the games that I joined in on, it was perfectly fine for me to do that. It probably didn't hurt that I was going around with my boyfriend, Brian. I dated Brian Bloom. That's how I ended up typing Gary's manuscript. Yeah. But still, I found it to be a creative, interesting place, and I was not leaving.
I love that. You just planted your feet and stayed. What are you still looking to knock down, Ivy?
So I think it is a lot easier for women to be creative now, and it's a lot more accepted. But one thing I had noticed, especially since I work in horror and sci-fi, is that people are very surprised that there are women in horror and sci-fi still, for whatever reason. There have been women in sci-fi since forever.
Well,
right.
And
so they don't always, and I've noticed this in things other than writing as well. Like I play percussion and I'm in male-dominated activities outside of writing. And they think of, when I tell people I do those things, they think of it more as a hobby and less of a career. Whereas I think if I was a teenage boy telling people that I had my first novel on the way, be like, oh, so this is your full-time career. But I often get asked, oh, so which fast food restaurant are you working at right now? But I think that's a big thing I'm trying to do is make it not a hobby, especially for women in it. So when I present my books to someone, they don't ask, what else are you doing? They just say, oh, this is really cool. I'm excited to read it.
Awesome, thank you. Do you have other questions after? Open field,
All right,
go ahead.
I have one for Rose. So you've done 9 of these Endless Quest books. Was there any one in particular that was your favorite or you had a real connection to?
Well, I think the first one, Return to Brookmere, was probably my favorite. Tied up personally, Brookmere was a place, it is an actual place that's important to me. And it was hard. It was very hard figuring out how to do that book. I'm not an analytical person. I have difficulty with abstract concepts, and I just couldn't understand how to do it. So I bought 3 copies. I don't remember which one it was, Daniel.
Are you talking about your inspiration for the Endless Quests?
Yeah,
Cave of Time by Edward Packard.
okay. I bought 3 copies of that, and I was perennially broke, so buying 3 copies of new books was a hardship, actually. But I bought them and deconstructed them and laid them out on the floor like you diagram a sentence in high school, and was able to track how he did it. And
Wow.
that's how I, figured it out. It filled the entire living room, all scotch taped together so I could see what he had done. And I copied that myself.
That is so cool. That is so cool.
I have to include that when Bill approached Anne McCaffrey about doing Pern Choose Your Own Adventures, and unlike previous CYAs, there were in licensed worlds, so they actually had character development and failures and heartache and all sorts of things. Anne wanted to know how a Choose Your Own Adventure worked. So very much like that, I had to explain the mechanics of it. You sort of reverse engineered it. But I gave Anne a very, very short Choose Your Own Adventure I wrote for her. And I put the diagram on a piece of paper with how everything doubles back, where they connect to, where the fatal section goes. And it was, for anyone familiar with the Pern series, it was called Robinson Hits the Sauce. And young journeyman Robinson goes to a Benton Weir party and ends up getting a little bit drunk. And he either succeeds or fails in going back to Benton Hold, where he belongs. So I had a complete diagram for her, showed her where it went back to, and how the mechanics worked. So she was able to understand how Choose Your Own Adventures worked.
And I was able to sell that because the Endless Quest had done well. So the other
Because it all
publishers
goes back
wanted
to that.
to follow in Rose's footsteps, and I was quite happy to follow in them and say, look what Rose did. But we won't do what she's doing. We're gonna do it our way. We're gonna license it and have the other main author involved, et cetera.
And Donovan, you still you have a physical bookstore. I stepped out for a moment when you introduced yourself. I don't know if you shared that.
Oh, yeah.
And you still move like all the Choose Your Own Adventure, Choose Your Own Path, Endless Quest. Like,
Yep.
What are some of the things that you have found in the genre fiction and game writing worlds that have just stood the test of time, that are still flying off the shelf in your store?
I think with those in particular, and like Goosebumps kind of stuff, it's parents that grew up on them buying it for their kids, and then I'm just there to keep it going generation to generation. And that's part of the reason I do middle grade books, because there's always a new batch of like 4th or 5th graders coming out, so I could just sell them the stuff that I made 10 years ago. Because I was like, go to the school, see the teacher, it's like, hey, get this to your kids. And then get them hooked.
First sample is
You
free.
little
Yeah.
boy.
Meet me at Studio Moonfall.
He's got a
More.
trunk full of stories.
Yeah, they don't run back in this.
And what are the new trends that you're seeing that are like newer things that are coming out that?
I don't know. I think it's my books have been like the big thing I push, and it's mostly simpler stuff. So yeah, we're fighting against YouTube and everything. So all the kids don't have the attention spans to dive too deep. I mean, some of them there are still like super reader kids, but for the most part, I'm keeping all my storytelling pretty simple. So just doing narrative coloring books, so they're still getting a story, and that might inspire them to read something with more meat on the bones.
To a degree, the end of the publishers putting out a lot of chosen path, Rose went to novels, Jody went to novels, was because Switch came out.
Nintendo.
Nintendo came out, and in a 1 month period, sales dropped 70%.
Wow.
Just poof, off the edge.
You're
Or just said, don't even finish the series, leave the last two up in the box. Because we can't sell them anymore. Nintendo sucked the whole entire market up.
Holy
It
cow,
was
I didn't realize like
Insane.
that
Yeah.
drop was that steep and that
Well,
fast.
they sold 2 million units in the first month of the Nintendo. The early Nintendo, it sold something like 30 million units eventually.
And the books
And
just
every kid who was reading and following an adventure was now doing it on the screen.
wow.
It's interesting you mentioned about like this hitched on short. I've seen, especially since the pandemic in the class, especially this year, my students are massive manga readers. And I whatever, because I remember when I was in school, if I had a comic book, my teacher was like, "Why are you reading that garbage?" Right? So it's like you read what you want. But especially the boys, they will go, but they'll sit and they'll read 30 episodes of a manga book. But it's nice and short, and even in there they've got chapters. And I think that's the whole attention span thing. I still got lots of people who are they'll sit down with a big huge book, but for a lot of kids now, it's also big. I find for the reluctant readers, they see their buddies reading this one, and they look at it like, well, this is not that difficult to read or get into. And I think that really contributes to it. So it's got its place to do it too. But that's definitely a trend I'm finding right now.
I think with a lot of the comics and manga and everything, I think a lot of that is coming from the top down too. From anything I've done with the traditional publishing world, I'm seeing the way they promote the stuff. It seems pretty clear that they bought a bunch of IP, and now they got the stuff for cheap, and now they're trying to push it real heavy at libraries and teachers and bookstores as well.
So I
Wings of
knew that our
Fire.
time, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna add to that, Wings of Fire is a really popular young adult series. And they, in the last year or so, they converted it all to graphic novels, yeah. Just because a lot of kids are doing that. And I've got 14 nieces and nephews, all 12 and under, and the ones that are reading chapter books are at that age. One of them is reading the novel versions of all the chapter books.
Yeah.
So I knew our time would go really fast, and it has. We have 5 minutes left. So I would like each of our panelists to take one of those 5 minutes, and just whatever one thing that you feel like it's really important to know in writing, whether that's games or novels. So just take a minute. We'll start with you, Rose.
Started that.
Like I said, we'll start with you, Jody Lyn.
It's very important to encourage kids to read. It's because they need to become critical thinkers. And the only way to do that is for them to see ideas that are not necessarily the ones that are espoused by the people who are around them. But shoving anything down their throats will make them resist it. This is one of the reasons why manga and comic books and graphic novels are useful for the younger readers, and simple concept books are useful for those in-between readers, the ones who are moving on to complex chapter books, is to ease them along the way and not put any stumbling blocks out for them. anything that will get them reading words is good. The fact that they are online constantly, even when they are too young for a lot of what they are consuming, is important because they are reading words. They're reading lots of words every day. And you cannot do better for them than by getting them reading, thinking, and even writing.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
We're entertainers. Writers are entertainers. It's just our medium. Like Jody could just stand up, I can write it. I can't do punchline. We're entertainers. And if you keep that in mind and do what will entertain your audience, everything Jody says has a reason. Everything about how you do it, while you do it. And the corollary of it is, if you're all, some of you are probably writers in here, if you're writing something you enjoy writing, it will be a much better book. If you find you aren't enjoying the writing of it, that you're just doing it, question if you're doing the right thing, if you shouldn't be doing it a different way. Because if except for comedians all claim to be tragic, but the reality is they've got a humorous bent. And if you can write your way that entertains you, it will entertain your readers, even if you think you're weird, because we all are.
If you're bored writing something, your readers will be bored reading it.
Thank you so much.
I think a really important thing today is not to be too humble about your own work. Talk about yourself to other authors and put yourself out there and brag about yourself a little bit. If I didn't have people pushing me to pretty much just brag about myself to everyone I meet, I would not be up here right now. So that can be a really great way to find your people, even if you think you're totally embarrassing yourself with your stories.
It's not, it's confidence, it's not
Yes.
cockiness. So
Yes.
It's sharing because what we made, you'll probably love. So, for doing things yourself, I think, just experiment, see what you like doing the best, and if you get into a writer's block, then just try writing something else for somebody's world. And short stories or just super simple stories. Like I usually recommend people just have a janitor go out to lunch in like whatever world you want to pull from, and then just write that story and see what roadblocks they come into, and then you write a story from start to finish, and then you get that experience under your belt.
Thank you.
Well, I guess to me, the most important part of a book is first the title. The title has to grab me, or else I'm not going to pick up the book. And then the most important thing after that is the very first sentence. If I'm not grabbed by the very first sentence of a book, I'm not likely to go past that first paragraph. And if you don't have me by the end of the first paragraph, I'm not going to read you. When I saw Indiana Jones, the very first one, when I came out of the theater, I went directly across the street to a bookstore and ordered the screenplay because I wanted to see how that was done. And from that point on, I learned that at the end of every chapter, there better be a reason to get that kid to turn to the next page and see what was happening next. So I guess all my chapters pretty much end in cliffhangers, and that's, I guess that all just comes under style of writing, but that's mine. And so you gotta, especially if you're dealing with boys, you gotta grab them. You really, there has to be enough action and interest, or they're not gonna go past that first paragraph or the first chapter. So.
That is our time. Honestly, like it's cut. So, because I got to get over to Swinghurst for the next one. Jody Lyn Nye, Bill Fawcett, Ivy Rear, Donovan Scherer, Rose Estes. Thank you so much.
Come see me in the vendor hall.